everybody, and welcome to this week's version of the Virtual World. And in this very exciting episode, it's all about how will the Metaverse bridge the Teraverse. And I am super excited to welcome a very dear friend of mine who I dare to say I've known for more years than I dare to tell you, but it is 30 years that I've probably known him. And we first got to know each other when Chris Gabriel, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, was working for Cabletron in the United States, and we've been very close ever since. And I will say that he's one of the most inspirational marketeers I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So I'm very super excited to invite Chris here today. So Chris, please welcome and thank you for taking the time. I know you're extremely busy. Every time I look on LinkedIn or follow you on social, you seem to be going all around the world, all these big events. Then you're certainly changing the conversation of industry at the moment. So thank you for joining. But please tell everyone a bit about you, a bit of background, and you're currently at Sapphire Systems. So it'd be great to hear a bit about Sapphire, and then we can get into the topic, which is all about the bridge of the Metaverse to the Teraverse, which you quite rightly have pointed out.
Nigel, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and without blowing smoke back the other way, you are absolutely one of the most inspirational people I've seen, and I'm that old. I remember when you invented digital streaming, and we sat there in Brick Lane, and you went, "Well, what if this is ever going to take off, right?" And now the whole world sits there watching that exact same thing, right? So really great to be here, and yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon, and I tell you why, because I've been in technology for as long as we've known each other, right? And it's always been in the physical world, right? So I've been in networking, data center, cloud, work for vendors and in the channel, which is really exciting. Work with a bunch of different customers around the world over many years, doing stuff in the tech world we've lived in for the last since it began. And you and the world that you now inhabit, and some of the things that you talk about now, I just think are a really exciting time for the business we're in. And Sapphire is a really interesting business. The way I like to think about what we do, if you live in the UK and you are an adult, you will do something once a week that Sapphire's probably been in the background in helping operate, right? So if you go into a pub, you get on a train or a bus, you buy insurance, you give to charity, you go into a and eat off a plate. If you drink a major drinks brand, that's one of our customers called Briggs, who do help design the product, the stills that make that around the world. And we help those companies operate either in finance or supply chain or IT or assets. So we're kind of in that core operating part of the world that help businesses run, right? And I think the conversation we're about to have, it's a bit mind-blowing, but I also think it's the most tangible bit of this thing called the Metaverse, which I know you call the Industrial Metavese, right? But absolutely, that's where I'm really keen to talk about today, is that bridge between these two worlds, right?
Well, I think certainly you are very authoritative in this space, because you had this all through your career. I've noticed that you've just kind of always been at the forefront of what's going to happen next in business. I think, and just to try and put some context for everyone listening, we've found recently there's this kind of confusion between what the metaverse is and what the industrial metaverse is. And we're kind of saying to everyone, listen, I think the metaverse is very embryonic. It's very early in its life cycle, but it will take a hold.
Yep.
No question about it, because you're thinking around the purchasing of art. You think about people who are buying digital spaces inside the metaverse to be able to have house, whatever it's going to be. That's all fine. It's next generation, no question about it. The industrial metaverse, however, has been here forever. Well, not forever. It's been here as long as you and I have been in business. But it's actually a combination of all these things coming together. And in fact, we're quite bold in saying now, listen, digital transformation is dead. Long live industrial metaverse, because it's now this bridge, everything coming together. You've got clouds, you've got immersive technology, you've got end user experience, but all these things all coming together in the industrial metaverse, which is fantastic. So what are you seeing in Sapphire as the new demand coming your way specifically around the industrial metaverse?
Well, I tell you, I forgot to answer your question, as I always do. And you told me to bring something with you, right? And
yes, well, I forgot to ask the question.
Well, no, I took you on a mind thought somewhere else. So I brought two things. One is my Brazilian flag on a little plinth as well. And the reason I brought this, you asked me to bring something special with me. And the reason this is really special is this was given to me by the Brazilian team in Logicalis. And Carlos Alves, who's a really good friend of mine, gave it to me when I left Logicalis as a thank you. And the reason it was a bit of a thank you and connect me to the Brazilian business and the Brazilian team down there is they led the project to deliver ServiceNow across our business. So effectively moving Logicalis at the time from a disconnected, disjointed, but really great managed service provider that ran multiple systems across the business to deliver those services. And I led the project. Well, sorry, I was the figurehead. I didn't lead it because they led it because I knew what they were doing to transform the way that we operated as a business, which was really fascinating to me because when you get into that, and this was IT, digital managed services operations, and I really treasure this, right? And it sits in the house really proudly because when somebody that you met through work and you've done a really big project with gives you something as a memento to take with you, I just and so I love my my Brazilian flag. With Wales at the World Cup.
I do remember that smart city implementation quite well. Actually, it looked very, very exciting for an SI. Well, sorry, a managed service business like Logicalis to move into that space, which you led and drove the whole concept. So, yeah, that's very. Thank you for sharing that.
Obviously with Wales in the World Cup, I won't be flagging it too much. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure we'll be meeting Brazil if I'm being perfectly honest. And I brought two things because you told me to bring this, and the other one, which is just. When I dug it out, I then realized what we were going to talk about, which was really fascinating, is I got talked into, as you do when you're excitable, is writing a chapter for a data center handbook many years ago. And you put your hand up to these and go, that'll take me 10 minutes and realize it's going to not take you 10 minutes. And I wrote the section on data center disaster recovery and high availability, right? I actually read it to myself and actually made sense, which is unusual for me because it's quite technical. But both of those got me thinking because, you go, I didn't pick them for this reason at all. It's purely coincidental. Is that project in ServiceNow was about how businesses operate, right, at scale. And I think the industrial metaverse and effectively you think about that. And I think about, we'll talk about this later, who are going to be the big players in the metaverse. You kind of think it's going to be those businesses are going to be really important, like ServiceNow and SAP. We want to talk about that. And then the other one clearly was, that's a data center handbook, right? That's pretty chunky. That was pre-hyperscaler, right? And you then think about what that is. That's about maintaining data center infrastructure, running things and operating big, lots of stuff. And you think about what we're about to talk about, the industrial metaverse. What does the industrial metaverse version of that book look like, right? So it was really interesting when I dug these out as, and I'm in a senior book I'm ever in, apart from probably in a children's book somewhere. So yeah, just go back to that conversation. So at Sapphire, so we are basically we call ourselves a digital operations transformation provider. But what we do is we help businesses operate through designing, implementing things like SAP, enterprise asset management with Hexagon, which is really interesting business in the certainly in the connected operations and moving into this industrial metaverse model. We work with a company called Sapphire Systems in finance operations, all the way through supply chains with SAP, and then with ServiceNow into IT and digital operations. And then the big thing is, which I think we're going to talk about, is if I think about businesses, they operate these systems in different parts of their business. But when businesses really work well is when they're really well connected, right? And you can touch a business in one part and flow all the way through to the other part of the business, right? And you get that frictionless, as we call it, business operating model. And what we've gone through, and I've looked back into our business and certainly into my career with networking and data center and all that, and this book is a great example of that. Is that book's got 48 chapters. Its businesses tend to be 48 chapters historically because they're in the Teraverse, right? And we operated very manually. Then we've got IT, And I think we're in this hybrid world now, of kind of Teraverse and Meta. Digital's probably the gap between the two, maybe. Perhaps that's how we think about it, right? In terms of where we are today, this thing we call digital is this staging post between this old world and this really crazy new world. So we help businesses operate, and our big thing is joining them up, right? So we try and join companies up. We try and help them think about using their data. We are definitely thinking about how they automate, how they deploy digital workers now into their businesses, and how they help drive productivity, creativity, transformation, innovation. And we do that in about 1,250 businesses in the UK and the US. So, and some really interesting companies, organizations, and I said, across all of those different parts of a business and how they operate.
That's fantastic. The thing, I didn't actually really appreciate how many customers you guys have got, which is fantastic to hear. And I also think that just going back to your point about this digital bridge between the Meta and the Teraverse worlds, can I have a quick question? Are you seeing a lot of your customers starting to define an industrial strategy, or are they still in the realm of, well, no, we've got a digital transformation strategy and that's what it is? Or is there kind of move towards thinking differently? And the reason why I ask is because obviously the big difference between digital transformation and the industrial metaverse, even though they're just evolutions of probably the same thing, is the adaptation of immersive technology, bringing in virtual reality, augmented reality, robotic simulation, bringing in underpinning of blockchain architecture to be able to increase payments and decentralization, all of that kind of stuff. How far on the journey of maturity are your customers? I'm assuming it's going to be a big kind of mix between the two, but is there a move towards that?
Yeah, and if I'm being, and obviously, as I said, there's a big scale of difference between the customers, and we're in different industries and sectors and verticals. And obviously, we've got some who I think are very progressive in their thinking about how they are reimagining the business, not just for the future, but more today. I do think I think actually there's many of them thinking about it. I think the challenge is the practicalities of doing that, and the shift and the step change to get there. And maybe I'm going to ask you this question, because you probably have a better view than I've got on it. Is I'm not convinced it's kind of this linear line, this sequential linear line to get from one to the next. And I think it's going to be that step change. So I think many of them have really emerged into the digital world, digitizing both the front end of their business, the way that they engage with customers and consumers, or whatever it may be, and very much digitizing the back end. How many of them have got a North Star, which is, we'll call it the Industrial Metaverse, as a North Star to where they're going? In reality, written down on paper, not many of them, right? But I actually think in their heads, there's probably more in their heads than in, when the CEO or where the COO is lying in bed at night, or sitting on the beach. They're thinking about what that next 5 or 10 years looks like. I think more and more of them are thinking about that, but probably not written down. And I think the big thing and again, it's probably something we've got to figure out, mate, is how do you describe it to them in a way that they can understand where the value to them is, what that transition feels like. And I'm old enough to remember Second Life, right? Which I Googled the other day, and it's still knocking around. It's a gaming platform now. But there was big things there. There was big, and obviously it fizzled out in a way. I think most people figure out that the time is right for this next shift. And I think it's going to help them. I think basically it's going to help. We've got to start to help customers write this down. But I deal with one. Let me just give you one example of a great company that I deal with called Neville's, and Andrew Neville, the CEO. I'm sure won't mind me mentioning it. I don't think his head's in the metaverse yet, but his head's in the how do I get a customer in a pub to be able to somehow immerse themselves in the product they do, which is the plate in front of you or the tableware, and shift from being in a physical space, this Teraverse, to getting that product delivered to their home because you love that plate, and the digital link between those two things. And I think so, and it's such a creative business and such a creative individual in terms of his thinking. But we've already deployed digital workers, but actually we're just doing a project to digitize through machine learning all of their ranges so that they can start to create those digital assets. And they're a £30 million UK business. So and a tableware provider, right? So not, but you can. They've got showrooms where people can come in and they bring hotel chains in to see their stuff. And if he's digitized his assets in that way, he can have his virtual showroom. But then I could be sat in the pub and go, oh, I really like this plate. It was its Genware. I can immerse myself then into their showroom that evening. So I think that's a really fascinating thing. But I can tell it's in Andrew's head. Has he got it written down on paper yet? No, but you can see where that business is going and some of the things that he's doing. So
and I think this is where the likes of I know this is going off piece a bit, but it's actually a fascinating line of conversation, because this is where I think where Sapphire Systems can really help organizations. For us, we're Iceberg Creative. We're quite verbal in what we want to be. We want to be this technology-focused organization that helps everyone get to where they want to be. So we have this tagline called "You Dream It." Well, you dream, we create, and it's that translation of the dream into what is real in terms of a solution deliverable that's always the hardest thing to try and get done. And I think to answer your question you're asking, that's what we're seeing is the translation. But where are they on saying, actually, no, we're in the industrial metaverse, or are we in a digital transformation program? And we're not necessarily saying, hey, this is a brand new book you have to write to get into the industrial metaverse, because you think, you're saying, is it a massive step change or is it a completely different direction? Well, actually, it is a step change, right? But actually, you have to recognize, you have to turn around a bit and look at all the steps you've actually traveled to get to this point, and actually realize, the next step is actually not that tall. It's actually not that difficult to get over. What we need to do, however, is just have a different strategy of how we get to the next step. And it's, because the creativity, and you were describing a fantastic example there about the plate. Well, in my head already, I was thinking, oh God, I could be at this table where I can turn over the plate, see the brand name on it, and actually I can go in and just order right where I'm sitting. And actually I can change the color of my plate while I'm eating. I can change the crock, all this kind of stuff I can do. That's next generation. It's taking those companies from where we are today, which is very digital in its kind of vendor world, and actually making that transform into the user world, which is very, very different. And to your and this is where Sapphire Systems can really help people, is actually get to that bridge of thinking. Actually, I also think where I want to go back a little bit. What you talked about SAP and ServiceNow, and this is where I think it's really interesting, because I think there's a mindset that people think, I know the brands that are going to be important in the metaverse. It's going to be Meta. Yeah. It's going to be Twitter, God forbid. It's going to be all these different other major vendors who are social platforms. But actually, I think the real winners are going to be SAP, the likes of SAP and ServiceNow. I think you and I were talking about this.
Yeah, no, I tell you what. Yeah, but that video you ran at the beginning was really interesting to me, because I was watching it. When I looked at that, and I'm not going to get running, but if you look at after this, you watch it again, and you watch those examples that you're showing, and you look what's behind that, and you go, well, there's SAP there, there's ServiceNow there. I'm running a digital service. There's an asset management platform sat behind that. And the reason is you think about that engineer. You had an engineer fixing something, doing some maintenance, right? They're actually fixing a real thing somewhere else there, right? They're not fixing they're fixing a digital twin. Well, that digital twin is a physical thing in a Teraverse, right? All of those actions have got to be stored and registered, and they're going to be using data from that thing to that physical thing into the digital world. They're going to be changing things in the meta world that's going to go back to the Terra world. So I was looking at that going, I'm not seeing Meta and Facebook, and I'm seeing SAP. I'm seeing go back. go back to this plate concept. So I go into a hotel I'm going into a hotel in the metaverse, right? So I'm doing the social piece of it, and I'm going for a meta dinner with my family, right? And I'm in this meta hotel, and I'm sat in a meta private dining room with my family because I've saved up enough money to pay for it, right? We've all put our £10 in to get into the price. And I look down at the tableware and I go, wow, that's beautiful. Because don't forget, it's art. And I go back to Neville's design that stuff, right? And I'm sitting there in the meta dining room, and I go, wouldn't it be great for having a family Christmas in 6 weeks' time, and we could have those plates on Christmas Day well, why can't I order them there? And now that order goes to Neville's, and Neville's actually now shipped me those plates. So I'm in a social setting in this meta world, but I want a physical thing to be right. And then I go back the other way. I'm rich enough to buy a Ferrari, right, or whatever it is. Let's go Aston Martin. Let's be patriotic, right? Which I think is owned by China now, but that's not the point. Anyway, so I buy my new Aston Martin, and it cost me 200 grand, right? And the Aston Martin say, but Chris, for another 20 grand, you can have the meta version of it delivered to your meta house, right? And you go, why on earth would I pay 20 grand for that? Well, in the meta world, I could rent that out to someone else's drive for the weekend, so that you're sitting having friends over in your meta house in Twin, and there's an Aston Martin. So, and you go, oh my God, but if you think about that, I'm going to buy things in the physical world that will then arrive in the meta world. I'm going to buy things in the meta world that I want delivering in the Terra world to my house, right? Because I've seen something, and actually I might own an asset that's in both because it's relevant. And for a Neville's and a Ferrari or an Aston Martin, that's about monetizing that. And whilst you might go, that sounds crazy today, watching streaming video in Brick Lane felt crazy 20 years ago, right? And now that's all we do. And I think, and going back to who's then going to be the winners, is that physical product, Terra product and the meta product are both products. And therefore, the selling of them, the designing of them, the ordering of them, the supply chain of them, the maintenance of them, the traceability of them, the has got to be done. And that's why I think the intersect of this world and the winners are going to be, so the service now, right, which will help the the meta world run, but actually you'll be running things in the meta world. And is it a physical asset, a meta asset? It doesn't make any difference, right? So I think that's genuinely what fascinates me, because I don't think you'll have different systems running the two separate things. You'll actually have digital operating platforms, or let's call them, we can call them MOPs from now on, meta operating platforms, right? So we'll coin that. We'll both have that one, right? But these MOPs, so in the world we've been in systems of record, we're now in what we call digital operating platforms, which are SAP and ServiceNow. They'll turn into MOPs, right? Meta operating platforms that will then span both those worlds. And I think that's the excitement. And then I'll stop getting excited and go back to, I think what we're doing today in the digitization piece with our customers is we're probably ensuring their back offices can operate in both of those worlds. Because if you digitize your back office and you start to deploy frictionless digital, as we call it, between your departments and your processes, and we'll talk about process mining maybe in a second, that means that you can operate in both worlds then, right? Because you're seamless enough, you've got no friction in your business. So I think that maybe we're on that back office path to being able to operate in both of the worlds together. Yeah.
So do you see then do you envision meta workers?
Well, I think we're not. I actually think we're really close to those already, right? So we're doing a lot, and I know we both, you're a bit of a master in processes transformation and the thinking around that. Is I see. So we call them digital workers, right? So we're deploying digital accounts payable workers. Neville's have actually got 2 digital workers in their business, right? Working with their Terra workers, right? But we see that digital worker today through a traditional interface, right? Which is a flat screen and whatever. Well, imagine being able to walk up to that digital worker in the Terra world and asking them how their day is, right? And how efficient they've been today. And they go, oh, Chris, I had a great day today. I processed 1,200 invoices, but I've got a thought because that Terra worker's also got process mining behind them. But Chris, I saw another process in the business I could make a bit more efficient, right? So I think actually, I'm going to be really, I think meta workers are probably the closest thing the first thing that's going to happen. Because I know some of the big consultancies are now onboarding all of their people through the metaverse, right? Then if you're onboarding a Terra worker and onboarding a meta worker, I think actually we're not. My sense is we're quite close to that, and being able to see your hybrid workforce in that way, you want to go and see that in the meta world. Maybe I think it's quite an interesting concept, but I reckon we're not that far away from having that ability to start to make that a bit of a reality.
Yeah, which brings me before we go into a subject that's both dear to both our hearts, which is process mining. Well, probably more to mine than probably yours, but I know you're very skilled in it. Before we get into that point, though, I want to come back into something else, which is talking about meta workers. We're talking about the metaverse, and which feels like if we're very close to having not a regime, but an environment that has a terminology for a workforce that's called a meta worker.
Yeah.
We're not that far away, I don't think. So, everything, as we all know, probably you and I have been around the block a few times. So we've seen the pace of change really accelerate. With the pace of change really on the move towards a completely 100% digital environment that has a complete visual layer on the digital environment, because there's no digital environment really on top of cloud. There isn't.
Cloud.
That's what people think digital transformation really is. But now we're getting to this multi-sensory world, which is amazing. Should businesses be worried about it? Are they? Is this a step they're scared of? And if they're scared to take the leap, thinking about the step analogy, how are they going to cope with that? I mean, what should they be thinking about? You call it a metaverse operating platform, and I actually, sorry to say, 2 weeks ago I called it a MOM, an MOM, which is a metaverse operating model. Because to me, the industrial metaverse is nothing else but process improvement. It's the next step. Therefore, you need to have your operating model change to cope with your meta workers, and this bridge between the meta and the Teraverse needs to be in your operating model. You need to have them, and there's no question in my mind that the likes of SAP and ServiceNow will, be a huge driving force behind the platform piece of it, which is fantastic. But in your, how, if you're talking to a business leader, you're very lucky to talk to Neville's, who seem to have a very visionary leader anyway, which is fantastic, and I'd love to learn more about that. If it's on your website, everyone's going to have a look at it as a case study, hopefully. But what is the biggest worry for a business leader or a line, business function leader? What should they be thinking about?
Well, now we've gone down that train of thought, right? Is my brain is why would this not make sense to a CEO, right? And I think what's interesting is, automation RPA is a good example of that, right? Is if I stand up and talk about RPA and automation, and you can kind of see these eyes kind of going, what is that? And then you go, just think about that being a digital worker, right? And how many digital workers would you want in your business over the next 2 to 3 years? And the reason you'd want those digital workers is your Terra workers, right, can get on with the things that they are brilliant at, the humans are great at. So what would that look like? And every single time you do that, people go, oh, I can understand that, right? And I think if you talk to a CEO around productivity, the scale in their business, how they're going to cope, how they're going to deliver growth, how they're going to cope with the skill shortage, how they're going to deploy their Terra workers in the most efficient and effective way and keep them excited and keep them engaged and drive value. I think it becomes less scary. I think it becomes more of an obvious next step. And I think you just said something really interesting, actually, which I wrote down, is we've got this thing called the cloud, and we go, it's transformation, it's digital, but we still see it through an old interface, don't we, right? We see it through, best one in the world, Outlook isn't the, I remember getting the first email, right? I remember having, I actually remember getting a thingy in a manila envelope sent to your office, and you opened it and that was a memo, right? That interface hasn't changed for 30 years, right? And how we interact and in business. And I think what we've got to do, and I think that's where people like SAP and ServiceNow, certainly Automation Anywhere and those guys come in, is I think as soon as we can demonstrate it in that very very logical environment, and I think the automation guys might be the first to do this in terms of these meta workers. I genuinely think that businesses do get it, and then what they want to know goes back to who's going to succeed is how do I run that world? Because what I can't have is meta workers going off and doing their own stuff and Terra workers going off. I've got to bring all of that together, which is why we call this frictionless digital. I've always thought of frictionless digital around systems talking together, but clearly it's also people using those systems. And now I think what we're saying is it's going to be the frictionless world between the meta world and the Terra world. And how do we join those up? And I think I know we are going to do some work and try and create a proof of concept on this. I think if I stuck a CEO in a meta world showing meta workers and Terra workers and how they interplay and how they can help run the business, I think it's going to become really, really tangible. My final little thing would be, and if I look at public services in the UK, and I'm going to take the health service as a great example, I think today, and I think it's an absolute negligence of government, if I'm being honest, I don't want to be political, but all of them, every single nurse and every single doctor and every single admin worker in the health service should have a digital co-worker today that is doing the stuff that stops from doing the thing that they want to do, which is look after people, right? So why can't a nurse turn to their right-hand side and see their digital co-worker and say, hey, could you go and sort all this paperwork out for me? And that digital worker says, of course I can. Give me 15 minutes and I'll get it all done. There's nothing stopping the government, if they really wanted to do this, is to say the goal of our country by 2030 is every public sector worker will have a digital co-worker that's doing the stuff that stops their productivity and stops them doing the thing that as citizens we need. And I've got a mum in a care home, right? Do I want that person working in the care home to be filling in forms, or do I want them to be sitting holding my mum's hand? Well, guess what I want them to be doing. But that's goes back to that.
But Chris, that's process improvement, right?
All of this is productivity, process improvement, efficiency. Yeah. It's taking friction out of the way businesses work. It's taking friction out of the way I, as a patient, would engage with the health service. It's process improvement in terms of new experiences, new revenue streams for customers, and ultimately, right, you can either make a pound or save a pound, right? In a business, there's only two options you got, right? You can make more money or save money, and helps you make more money. I think that's where this looks like, and the industrial metaverse, obviously. And in fact, I in my little handbook, I was reading it earlier on, and I used the example of, and this is back quite a few years now, of Boeing, Airbus, or the engines on an Airbus have a 1 in 30 year failure rate, right? Why? Because they got the digital twin spinning around, and they're doing all that stuff. And I think that's where you go, look, if we take you into the meta world in industrial, and then we connect that with the meta world social, where people can use your products, buy your products, but actually that has a response back in the Terra world where you can make more money there or save more money there. I think that's the bit that's the bit that's going to make this really exciting and really really real for people.
It's releasing high value time from what the metaverse will do is release that time back into the Teraverse to actually have high impact opportunities. And I want to go back into one thing you talked about.
By the way, Automation Anywhere call that unlocking the human potential, which I really
that's
that, right?
A fantastic slogan, and one that's very genuine. And actually, it goes back to what I'm about to talk about. Actually, is you go back to your NHS line there, the storyline about having the digital twin. And actually, what we need to do, what government needs to do, and what we need to do as an industrialized nation, and I'm talking about wherever you are in the world, is stop using the word paperwork. I mean, can you do my paperwork? No, stop doing that. I mean, that's a phrase that reflects on the maturity or lack of maturity of the business. So and actually the digital twin or my digital co-worker, it's another version of me, automatically knows what I need to go do.
I just wrote one of my never-ending blogs on LinkedIn, which I think calls people to fall asleep halfway through because they're so long.
No, don't worry. But
yeah. But my last one, I called it absolute zero, right? And where in this digital world we're heading to, because we're using zero a lot in the tech industry at the minute. Zero trust. Yeah. And one of the things I talked about was zero paperwork. And the way I described it is, do you undervalue the people that work for you so much that you would make them do a task that could be done digitally? Do you just not care for them that much that you'll make them sit there? But a nurse, right? Do you undervalue a nurse that much that you'll make him or her sit there and do paperwork when they could be treating a patient? Or do you the way I and we talk about this a little bit, and Mark Wheeler, who's our head of AI and automation, you need to get on, Nigel. We talk about this. Can you imagine a job description in 2 or 3 years' time that says, we want you to come and work in our finance function, and your job will be 46% of your time copying numbers between spreadsheets, right? And then what we'll expect you to do is sit there and respond to invoice queries from customers. And then part of your day job will be creating new suppliers on our, right? Who would want to go and work for that company, right? Imagine if you did a job advert tomorrow that says, come and work in my finance function. The day you join, you'll be introduced to your digital co-worker who will do all of the crap that you expect you're going to do as part of your job. Because what we want you doing is running the business, giving us insights, driving decision-making in the business through finance numbers, being a source of knowledge for other, going and working with. But my point, who would want to go and do the other job, right? So, and I then go back to this, why I think maybe meta workers will be the first real thing that brings this to life to people. I think we're not far away from that. So I think if you look at what's going on today, in terms of the growth, in terms of RPA and automation and process improvement, and then we'll talk about process mining in a second. I really think we could get there quite quickly. I think we could start to show that, and I know we're going to have a chat about it, but we can start to show that really quickly. I think your automation anywheres, your SAPs in terms of their automation, process mining, ServiceNow doing the same thing. I think those are the people that could really take a leap into this and go really hard and fast on it.
And I know you represent them, but I'll as an independent, I'll say they've got a responsibility actually to do it, and they've got a duty of care to their customers to start pushing the boundaries a bit in terms of functionality to get into it. But which I know they're doing, and I can't wait for it to happen because we kind of need them to do it. But I also want to thank you for giving before we talk about process mining, a fabulous link to the topic, which is that bridge between the metaverse and the Teraverse, which is talking about that job description in finance. But just for everyone who's listening, who's considering that as a simple statement, it's not. You just think about the performance improvement you get from the people in the Teraverse by doing that. I mean, if you just did a simple calculation about if I took away, there's 220 odd days in the working year. If I was to gain 100 days of Teraverse improvement, right?
Yeah.
What will that do?
Nigel,
I'm not spending the money on human capital replacement because it's a digital world. So the cost of entry is very low. The barrier to entries are very low. So you brought up a very viable point.
Yeah, and Nigel, maybe we need to have a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever, or I'm sure you'll have done it by.
Write a book about it.
Well, I'm sure you'll have done this by Monday because I know what you like, right? But it would be interesting to come up with some kind of formula, which I think exists now. I think you've just come up with something that's really interesting, right? Is the efficiency levels we should expect in the metaverse versus what we should expect in the Teraverse. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to move, say, a efficiency quotient of 3 in the Teraverse for an activity, and it goes to an 8 in the metaverse. And actually, we look at that and we stop calling it automation and RPA, right? If you go, right, if you do this job in the industrial Teraverse, it'll be a 3. If you could do that job in the industrial metaverse, you'll go up to an 8 or a 9 or even get to a 10, right? And then you go to paperwork. Well, guess what? In the Teraverse, a paperwork inefficiency is a 1, right? In the metaverse, 0. In the industrial metaverse, it's getting to a 9 or a 10. So where do you want to do that function? Do you want to do it in the industrial Teraverse, or do you want to do it in the industrial metaverse? And if we just did all the jobs a business does and goes, right, where in the Teraverse to metaverse would it fit in terms of and then you'll be able to actually map out your business for the next 10, 15, in other words, you can then go, can actually have a strategy around that. I'm going to move these things up into this one. I'm going to keep things down here.
Rather than have a trust pilot ratings, you can have a meta pilot ratings.
Yeah, and just so
my service that I got from highly rated, highly mature industrial metaverse business, my customer service experience was off the chart because the processes bloody worked.
Yeah. And then when it becomes quite interesting and without always just talking about productivity, because you're just effectively saying humans are just is what you're then saying is then you look at the other one, which is emotional intelligence and decision making and that, and you go, right. So I definitely want humans doing that, probably augmented by technology, because that allows them to make smarter, faster decisions. But if I can have humans meeting in the Teraverse or the metaverse, and I can augment them in one way with this kind of technology, I then make humans that more productive. So, and actually what that means, and let's be honest, right? Everybody talks about the 4-day week and how it's going to be wonderful, right? And what everybody's currently doing, if I'm being, I don't know how you operate, but I read loads of articles on it, and all I hear is actually what people are doing is they're fitting in 5 days worth of work in 4 days, right? Well, what if we could just take away the 5th day, right? All we're doing is in the first 4 days, they've got to do 5 days worth of work to get a day off. Actually, let's take away the 5th day, and let's just go work 4 days, because the 5th day has been done by the meta workers that the business runs, right?
Well, but Chris, let's also be real, right? The 5-day week was created in the Industrial Revolution. Over 300 years ago, did that formula come in to play to put an organizational structure for factory workers?
Yeah,
that's how it started. And 300 years later, we have this thing called the Industrial Metaverse, which is a perfect opportunity to change the dynamics of how an operating model of a business should work. So should days work actually happen? It is a really, some people might consider this, this is just too big a thing to chew off. I can't cope with this restructuring. But those that do it, and again, you and I are both repeating the same message here, which is quite interesting, which we always seem to have done so long we've known each other. But those that start thinking like this and start looking at their own supply chain, and I'm talking about the likes of SAP and ServiceNow and Automation Anywhere, which I do think are, everyone who's listening to this, please check them out. If you're not following them, do. But it'll be the link of Sapphire Systems brings in as that layer to make that thing work, because they won't work independently. They have to be brought together to work cohesively in the industrial metaverse.
Yeah, and Nigel, on that point though, is I think what you guys are doing and what we do, right, is you call yourselves a creative, right, and we're a digital operations partner. We're not that far away from each other in reality, right? And that's going to merge. I think it's already merging in certain of the big SIs, right? Your big top 4. So I also think that it will merge what you guys do and what we do to become, actually we'll effectively have to become together at some point, because
that goes back to my point earlier, saying that era of digital transformation is over, because the whole visual experience of what the user is now expecting through immersive technology is now there. So you have this whole creative nature and an implementation expertise like you guys bring, and having forward-thinking vendors all having to work together in unison for a very important reason, is that people can't treat, the customers can't treat this as a standard IT project. It's so different. the stakeholders getting involved in trying to get to Industrial Metaverse are not your typical norm business departments. They're very different. It isn't a lot of creativity. It's end user experience people, it's advertising people, it's marketing people, it's brand people, it's sales people getting involved in actually what is this application or this step change we're trying to create. So there's a force going on of changing, and people, we have a thing called design thinking is also dead, right? It's now called vision thinking.
Yeah.
Because vision thinking forces you to have a different approach to how you implement this project, which will be a project. So it's really interesting times, but I don't want to make this a scary thing, actually, because the barriers to entry for everyone is very low. I want to find skilled people like you.
Yeah, and you again. I was actually visualizing something as you were talking, and you said vision thinking, and I went, if you can envision a traditional office, right? And we know they're half empty at the minute, if not less than that, right? And you've got these desks, right? And you walk into, and our office is busy some days and not so much. And you go in and go look at all those wasted things. If you could see meta workers doing jobs at those desks, they're not empty, right? It's just you go back to your 300-year-old, you've got a physical desk to sit at. That's where you do your work, right? And now we know I'm on a kitchen table, right? And I've got a bad hip because of sitting at the kitchen table, but that's a different story. Is if you look at your business, and that's where we get to process mining. If you could see your Terra, and let's call it digital for now. If you could see your Terra business and digital business, and you could see them both together and how they operate together and how that drives your business forward, and that's very difficult to visualize today. That's part of the thing I think that is really interesting, and what we've got to show people is you walk into an office and you go, oh my God, there's not many people in, and they're not doing much or whatever it may be, right? You've got no idea today because you don't know how many digital workers are sat in the background, and you don't know how much of your business has been digitized, right? Which is process. If you could see, and I can walk up to, and I can't walk up to them, but I can go onto a little screen and see how efficient my digital worker is. My digital worker will tell me what's wrong with the thing that they're doing and how it could be done better. How many businesses, and I know we say we do, but we don't, walk up to someone who's doing a job and say, look, could you do this job more efficiently, and what would you do to change it? And that's called process change, isn't it? Right? It's called this transformational thing. Imagine if you could see all of that together and understand how your business was operating at all of those levels. That's the bit that's going to really, I think, make this work. And I think the tools and I think the technology is coming. So process mining being one of the, process envisioning, whatever we're going to call it now. Is I think that's going to start to really make this thing right. And I do think businesses, and this shouldn't be scary, this metaverse thing we're talking about, because I do think many businesses are already somewhere on their way with wanting to know how their business works in that level and having to join it up and thinking about process improvement or automation as one of the things that they use to align that. And out of our customers, we did a survey 2 years ago and said, how many of you thinking that automation is going to play a bigger part in your business? And 90% said it would. I don't think they thought of meta workers in that thought, but I think that's the bit. And if you can show people that, and I'm going to do it on, if we can stick a headset on a CEO and they can see how their Terra business is operating and how the meta bit of their business is operating and how that's.
Hold on.
Oh.
Wait, let me show you
the
next generation laptop. The next generation laptop is this.
Yeah. Well, that's the next generation process mining tool, right? That's the next generation business efficiency tool. And go back and bring that up again, because that's really interesting, right? Because we talked about this a couple of years ago. All process mining, process efficiency, automation is time and motion study, but it's in the meta. So it's time and motion in the meta world, right? And it's that together. And imagine if you're a CEO or you're the head of a hospital. Let's go back to the hospital, right? And you could walk around your hospital with that on and look into departments and look at patients or look at your staff and see how overworked they are.
Not even walk.
No, well, not even walk. Exactly. I mean, but
virtually walk.
Yeah. But virtually walk, right? But you can literally meta travel around your business, or your hospital or your factory or your city, if you're running a city, right? I mean, let's get that on the mayors of all of the cities, and they can go around and see where crime, or they can see how efficient the police are, or how overworked they are, right? Or and then go, why not have to even think why it's happening, because they can go, that police officer's doing 63% paperwork all day long. That's the bit that's going to make that's the exciting bit for me, is being able to go back to see the world in a different way. But it's very difficult to see businesses, how they operate simply. And I think if that aids that, and we can do that, I think that's the bit. I mean, I'm really excited about it. I wish I was 30 again, and handsome and good looking and thin.
Well, you've always been handsome. Thin, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, no, I'm thin, I'm not so sure. But if I think that's huge. And then go back to the economy and where the UK can lead. We can lead on that, because actually the some of the great businesses, and you've worked with some of them, which are UK innovators around AI and machine learning and process and whatever, and we need to encourage the SAPs and the ServiceNows and the Automation Anywheres and stuff to invest. But we've also got a really exciting thing in the UK, which is we've got big public sector organizations who can adopt this and drive the agenda. We're a service economy, so we can drive that. We're also a big, we actually do create, we don't make as much stuff as we used to, but we create it and innovate on it. So there's no reason why we couldn't be the world leaders in meta industrial technologies. And I think, what an exciting career to have, right? Who would not want to go and work in that world, right? So I think from that, it's also really important.
The UK started the industrial revolution, right?
Well, and the internet, in fact, I mean, both, right? If you think about it, right?
Yeah. So we have always been, as a nation, at the forefront of these things. And I think you're absolutely right. The fact that we are no longer a product-orientated economy in the UK, there are many great nations that are, but we're a very strong service-orientated nation and economy.
But Nigel, as a service economy, this is fundamental to us, right? Because if I'm a process consultant, I'm an auditor, I'm an engineer, and I can go and fix a business anywhere in the world, right? So let's say we train up brilliant consultants in the UK, or finance folks, right? Whatever it may be, right? Is I can sit here in Newbury, and I could go and look at the processes of a business in India or China or America, and I can sell my expertise to go and help their business. So the economic opportunity here, I think, for the countries that decide to do this is huge. And as a service economy, there's I think the UK is in a huge position to go and do something really exciting.
I agree, and I think it is a very exciting time. I think I've spoken about it quite a few times recently. Well, actually, I feel very I've known you for a long time, and we started our careers about the same time in the world of technology, and you've been far more successful than I have at it. But it is. I feel quite blessed that I feel like this is the best inflection point in my career.
I agree with you, mate.
Yeah, I mean, when we first knew each other in the States, I was involved lucky to be involved in the World Wide Web in the 90s, and the video conferencing thing I got involved with, which is another inflection point. And I needed you, Cabletron, to be the infrastructure to deliver it, which is fantastic. And then the streaming thing we got involved with. But now, for the first time, all those things are now coming together all at once.
And I do think it's coming together at a time where we're talking about the environment and sustainability, and we're talking about human capital and potential, and we're thinking about what our my kids are going to be doing in 5, 10, 15 years time. And I think that's the bit that's exciting. And obviously we're in an economic situation at the minute, and as a globe, but certainly in the UK. And I think sometimes things happen just at the right time. And from my, I've been lucky, and you've been in multiple different parts of the tech space. Your stuff that you've done historically in video and immersive technologies and streaming and creative and process, and now this, and I've done the infrastructure, and now into this operating platform. The fact that we can have this conversation, and hopefully it makes sense to people watching, but it fundamentally just makes sense, right? And And I do go back to my nurse or my doctor or my school teacher, you know, or whatever it may be, and I think about just that, and then I think about, you know, what we see going on in offices and warehouses and factories and maintenance, and you just go, if we can really make this work, and then go back to then who's going to be successful, it has got to be these industrial businesses, these industrial, and I go back to in software, the ServiceNows, the SAPs, and all those other guys that really make this happen. And I do get the sense that it is an inflection point that is actually going to materialize. It's not going to be virtual and all that shit, right? It's going to actually be real. So,
yeah, and I agree. Final word, I think,
yeah.
you know, is everyone don't get confused by what's happening in the turbulence in the market. You know, those are external factors not relevant to this particular topic. And
I don't think. And Nigel, just one thing is, if you look at Gartner came out, and obviously those, you know, those surveys and those numbers, but Gartner came out a couple of weeks ago, earlier on in October, and said, where's spending going to happen? So the IT digital space is still going to go up, right? 5.4%, I think it was. Devices flat to down. The one area that it says that will go up is enterprise software, and I would class the metaverse in industrial metaverse is enterprise software, right? And what it said was, look, when things are hard and when economies are, you know, recession or economies are tough, businesses need to go and invest in, and they do invest in making their core operations more effective. And I think if we continue down that road and we really, really double down into those areas we've been talking about, process automation, mining, these digital operating platforms, we integrate these, that digital core for the Teraverse becomes the new digital core for the metaverse, and therefore I think it will accelerate that. So in a way, oddly, these challenging times will just accelerate this, and I think actually we'll get there. We'll get there faster.
No, I agree. So Chris, as always, my friend, an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for spending time. I think, you know, a couple of things that I've taken away from what you've said is that clearly it's the big SAP, ServiceNow, automation anywhere vendors that organizations should be starting to pay close attention to. Obviously, there's an underpinning sentiment to my words here, which obviously Sapphire Systems are an organization that you need to rely on to bring all those things together because of what is required. But I think from a visionary perspective, I think that, you know, a lot of vendors, with those three in particular, which we've been talking about, are very relevant. You know, there has been you know, people talk, they're going to be dinosaurs, they're going to be all these unicorns are coming. That is not going to be the case. And I think you're shaking your head, and I'm shaking my head because we've been around long enough to know that they're going to be actually probably far more attractive. Maybe their moment is coming, particularly automation anywhere. Maybe their time is coming. So thank you for giving us a view on that. And also thank you for laying out some very interesting anecdotes about this bridge between the metaverse and Teraverse, and how business leaders should be thinking about the two, because they're not separate. They have to work together. But it's that unlocking of human potential in the Teraverse that the metaverse will enable an organization, no matter how big or how small. You know, and you brought Neville's up, which is a fantastic use case about how they're thinking, and it'd be great to see how they progress in the next 5 years. I think that'll be a very interesting organization to watch and see. And also, I picked up from this is that, you know, you're seeing that people may not know they're thinking they're there or on the journey to being where they need to be, but they probably are. And it's how they translate that into a business strategy that actually is no more than we both talked about, which is this process improvement, whether it's about platforms or operating models or whatever it might be. So thank you very much for being a huge insight and an authority, as always. And I'd love to interview more about some of this stuff, particularly as we start to talk about process mining in the virtual world. But just to finish, if you wouldn't mind, what's this one big message you'd like to give everybody?
I think we are building the digital core of the future, and I think it's a great time for businesses to revision thinking, right? What their business and not wildly looks like in this new world. And actually, I think it will really make sense of the investment, because the investment decisions they're making today, right? So I think, and then what I would argue is we as the community in this space, I think we've got to get together and start to talk about these things in far more in the terms that I think we've just spoken about, right? Because after the end of this conversation, I'm sitting there going, we talked about this before a little bit, and I'm sitting there going, this is really, really exciting and the opportunity. But I think we've got to work together to re-envision it and then make it very, very practical and show people what this might look like. And I think, so the digital core you're building today is your meta core, right? Just think about it in that way, and then that's, and whilst you're going to get the value today, the potential for tomorrow is huge. And I think that's what excites me most.
Thank you, my friend. Listen, thank you again, Chris.
Thank you, Nigel.
Yeah, love the family and stay blessed, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, cheers, mate. See you later.
All the best. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.